The emperor who was secretly a slave. Imagine being born with nothing. No family name anyone recognizes, no land, no rank, possibly not even freedom guaranteed at birth. And then imagine that, decades later, you are standing in front of the entire Roman army, sword in hand, having just personally executed the second most powerful man in the empire. And the soldiers around you are cheering because they've just made you emperor. That is how Diocletian's story begins. And the strange part isn't just that he rose from nothing. It's that centuries later, in a completely different empire, this exact pattern happens again. Except that time, there's no possibly about it. So here's what this video is actually about. Most people, if they know Diocletian at all, know him as the emperor who split Rome into 4 pieces, or the one who persecuted Christians. What most people don't know is where he actually came from, how close Rome came to permanent collapse right before he took power, and how his entire reign was one long, high-stakes experiment in whether a man from nothing could out-design the chaos that made his own rise possible. And I'll save the second half of this story for the end, because once you hear what happened in Egypt centuries later, secretly a slave stops being a maybe and becomes something historians can prove happened again and again. Let's start with what we actually know about where Diocletian came from, because even historians argue about this. Ancient sources describe him as low-born, likely from the Roman province of Dalmatia, possibly the son of a scribe, possibly from a family that had been enslaved and later freed. The record isn't precise enough to say definitively he was born a slave. What it is precise about is this: he had no aristocratic name, no inherited rank, nothing that would normally put a man anywhere near the throne of Rome. So how does someone like that end up emperor? The answer starts with just how badly Rome needed someone like him. The 50 years before Diocletian are known to historians as the crisis of the 3rd century, and the name undersells it. Constant civil war. Emperors ruling for months before being murdered or overthrown. Runaway inflation. Barbarian invasions on multiple fronts at once. The old system, where birth determined who got to rule, had already broken down, because birth wasn't producing anyone who could hold the empire together. That collapse is the opening a low-born soldier needed. Diocletian doesn't rise despite the crisis. He rises because of it. He climbs the only ladder available to a man without a name: the military, cavalry command, bodyguard leadership for the emperor himself. Every rung earned, because there was no shortcut available to him. And then, in 284 AD, the Emperor Numerian dies under suspicious circumstances during a military campaign. What happens next is the moment that actually makes Diocletian emperor, and it's brutal. In front of the assembled army, Diocletian accuses the Praetorian prefect Aper of murdering Numerian, and then personally kills him on the spot. No trial, no investigation. Just Diocletian, a sword, and a very public, very theatrical claim to legitimacy in front of the men whose loyalty he needs. The troops proclaim him emperor immediately afterward. This isn't a coronation. It's a seizure of power performed as spectacle, and it works. Now he's got the empire. The question becomes, what does a man who clawed his way up from nothing actually do with it? His signature answer is almost absurdly ambitious. Diocletian doesn't just rule. He redesigns the entire system of succession. He splits the empire into 4 rulers at once, 2 senior emperors and 2 junior successors in training, a system historians call the tetrarchy. The logic is simple. The crisis that made his own rise possible happened because succession kept collapsing into civil war. So he tries to plan the transitions of power in advance, instead of leaving them to chance and violence. He also tries something almost nobody attempts: controlling the entire imperial economy by decree. The Edict on Maximum Prices sets hard caps on prices and wages across the empire, an attempt to stop runaway inflation in its tracks. It's one of the most detailed surviving records of Roman-era prices and goods. And it's also, by most historical assessments, a failure. People evade it, ignore it, or route around it almost immediately. You can outfight an army. You can't out-decree an economy. There's a darker chapter here too, and it's worth sitting with, rather than skipping past. Diocletian also launches the last and most severe persecution of Christians in Roman history. Churches destroyed, scripture seized, executions carried out across the empire. It's a stark counterweight to the reformer image, and it makes what happens right after his reign even more ironic, because one of his own tetrarchy's successors, a man named Constantine, will go on to make Christianity the empire's favored religion. And then Diocletian does something almost no Roman emperor before him ever did. In 305 AD, at the height of his power, he voluntarily gives it up. He abdicates, retires to a palace he'd built for himself on the Dalmatian coast, and reportedly spends his remaining years growing cabbages. Emperors dying peacefully in bed was rare enough in this era. One choosing to simply walk away from the throne was almost unheard of. It doesn't last. Within a year of his retirement, the careful four-ruler system he designed to prevent civil war collapses into exactly that: rival claimants fighting for control, eventually including Constantine himself. The man who rose from nothing to fix Rome's succession crisis couldn't make his own fix outlive him by more than a few months. So that's Diocletian. A probably story. Probably lowborn, possibly from an enslaved family, likely the son of a scribe. Compelling, but not airtight. Here's the part I promised you, the part that turns probably into provably. Centuries later, in medieval Egypt, an entirely different system produces the same outcome, except with no ambiguity at all. Beginning under the Ayyubid dynasty and continuing for nearly 300 years, an entire ruling class was built from the Mamluks. Boys and young men, purchased specifically as slaves, brought in from regions like the Caucasus and Central Asia, converted and trained as elite soldiers. That's not a rumor. That's the actual documented foundation of the system. And these weren't just soldiers who served loyally. Mamluk slave soldiers didn't just support the throne, they took it. Repeatedly. For close to 3 centuries, sultans of Egypt were men who had, at some point earlier in their lives, literally been bought and sold as property. Not possibly enslaved family. Purchased, documented, sultan after sultan. Put the two stories side by side, and the point sharpens instead of repeating itself. Diocletian shows you it was possible for a man from nothing to reach the absolute top of Roman power if the system around him had already broken enough to let him through. The Mamluks show you that this wasn't a one-time fluke of chaos. In the right conditions, it could become the system itself over and over for centuries. So which is the real story? The emperor who was maybe, probably, once enslaved? Or the empire built entirely on former slaves who kept seizing the throne? Maybe it's both. Maybe the real pattern here is that the idea of power always belonging to the well-born is one of history's most consistently, repeatedly broken rules. If you want to see what happened after Diocletian's retirement, because the succession war his own system tried to prevent is a wild story on its own, there's a video right here that gets into it. Go watch that next, And if you're not subscribed yet, hit the button so you don't miss what's coming. And let me know in the comments, which is wilder to you, an emperor from nothing or an entire dynasty of former slaves? I'll be reading them.